Um, let's watch it really quick.
Right. But all of that is in the system.
Yeah. No, that's not
the bank records.
So I have like I've downloaded the bank records, but the problem is that every time it says check, I was also paying all of the employees by check. So I can go through that and pull out, but then in order to make those line up, I have to, because on the checks itself.
Okay, people are going to hate me for this, but we need to talk about Crystal. I think it needs to be addressed, and I think we need to have an honest and true conversation about Crystal. Before we go into that, I want to tell you something about my channel. What I don't want to do for you guys is recycle material. I get so tired of clicking on videos, and it's just a reaction to people watching content that we've all seen a million times. And I want to bring a new perspective when I do a video. I don't want to, again, recycle content. So let's go into it. We need to have a serious conversation about Crystal. I have a problem with Crystal. I have a problem with the way she stumbles after this question is asked, how much she owes Brian. If you notice the awkward pause, it's not great. And there's another thing I have a problem with. It is a big problem to me that Crystal cannot estimate how much she owes Brian. And I'll play another clip here in a minute, but she's talking about, you know, she can't estimate how much she owes Brian because she moved to Spain and her checkbooks are somewhere, right? Somewhere in a mystery storage location. And even if she had the checkbooks, she can't distinguish between if it was from the carbon copy of the checkbook, she can't distinguish if it was a payment to Brian or her employees. And I just find that to be very misleading because I've, you know, just owning a business, I've looked back at my bank records and I've been able to like take certain amounts that I know my employees typically earn. I know this is probably a payroll amount, and I don't even have to see the name or see the carbon copy of the check, just by the pricing. I know, all right, this is most likely paid out to my employees. And, you know, I would assume just by looking at that, you can kind of tell what's paid out to Brian. I mean, Brian's payments are probably going to be larger, more inconsistent versus your, you know, your people on your payroll. And I don't understand why the carbon copy doesn't just simply say paid to Brian. I can't buy that. So I think, you know, there's some legit questions with Crystal and her honesty. This is a backseat role. It's easy to do that. It's easy to judge someone. I think they have really good intentions. I don't think they went into this to cheat Brian, but it wouldn't surprise me, and this is speculation, if Crystal didn't utilize some of the money she sold from consignment to keep her business afloat, thinking that she would reinvest that money or make that money back up at the end of the year to pay Brian's total. I think she has like the best intentions of making Brian whole. And most people that commit fraud do have the best intentions. And that's how it starts, is, you know, their business is going broke and they think if they take money from here that's not really theirs and put it here for a moment, they can repay it. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't, and you get exposed. And it wouldn't surprise me if this isn't kind of what's going on with Crystal. Again, that's speculation, and it's going off my gut feelings. It's not, none of this is facts. But I just kind of found it hard to believe, especially it's been a year and this thing has exploded, and all public eyes are on this scandal. And you can't sit down and estimate how much you paid Brian so far. You know, let's forget the amount you owe him, but I think you can get a rough estimate, at least a rough estimate, what you paid him so far up until the point that your store was brutally taken over, brute force taken over. And this is not to say Bricks and Minifigs is not at fault and they don't hold the liability ultimately to make Brian whole, because they do. And they do all for the sequence of events and luckily the documentation. And let's just get into a couple of videos here, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Done in
He would
some,
come
you
into
know,
the store
he
every
was
month.
well aware, and it was working, and
Yeah.
he was satisfied with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then was
Yeah.
taken.
I know one thing a lot of people were wanting to know is, you guys know how much before corporate took over?
So that I don't have those
one.
numbers because I can't, in all of the packing and moving we've done, I can't currently find my checkbooks from the store. They're here somewhere in a stack of boxes.
Right. But all of that is in the system.
Yeah. Well,
that they won't let us get into. So
no,
that's the other thing.
no, that's not
The bank records.
So I have like I've downloaded the bank records, but the problem is that every time it says check, I was also paying all of the employees by check. So I can go through that and pull out, but then in order to make those line up, I have to, because on the checks itself, the carbon copy one, it'll have the names. So I have the bank records. I can go through but then you've also got to pull out 4 or 5 different checks. And then that means I have to go through all the payroll.
Right.
Yeah, you might have to go through all the payroll. You got to do that and file your taxes, your business taxes. So those tax forms you filled out to pay taxes for every ounce of money you paid your employees are well documented, and they correspond to every check that you wrote to your employees. You should already have all that information. I find this to be a problem. I'll be honest with you, the way they stumble, I mean, they're kind of both they're definitely not on the same page about what's in the POS system. And I don't see Crystal looking straight into the camera. I see her kind of looking away and just trying to stumble to say something here. I think this is a problem for sure. Doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter. And why doesn't it matter? Because there's something legally called successor liability. And luckily, let's watch this next video because this explains why it doesn't matter. Oh, gotta hit play.
He has not been paid his percentage yet, and if I don't tickets, I won't know how much I need to pay him.
Okay. So Crystal, ultimately, that's a business thing. And if taking on the business, he takes all that kind of stuff like that.
So going back to after you see that video, you see it's clearly documented in the video that Bricks and Minifigs, they're notified of a consignment and they're notified on video, and it's clearly documented that they acknowledge the notification and they also respond by saying, oh, okay, Crystal, that's really a business thing, and that will be passed on to the next business owner. And this is when we talk about successor liability. It's when a company buys another company. You have an obligation to do what we call due diligence. You have an obligation to know exactly what you're buying, not only all the goods and the profit and the capital you think you're going to make from that company, but also the debt and the liability, and every contract that company holds either has to be negotiated during the due diligence or you assume the liability, successor liability. And, you know, Bricks and Minifigs, I heard Ammon McNeff during his interview say one thing, and I know I said this. He said, you know, we sent a low-level employee to do the takeover. And I think what they're doing is staging the platform to say this employee didn't have the authority to receive notice, and the employee didn't have authority to acknowledge any legal binding contracts or issues with the takeover of the store. But my argument is this employee, Bricks and Minifigs, put enough confidence in to do the brute force takeover. Again, this takeover was at 10 p.m. at night or nighttime, like really bizarre, right? it was like, hey, we got to go take over this store. It's nighttime. Really abnormal for a corporation to act like that. They send this employee down. This employee is an active agent of the company. So this is very important. They entrust him to oversee the takeover of the store. Therefore, whether or not he had authority to accept contracts or debt or liability with the transition, the takeover, he definitely had authority to receive notice. And he received notice of the consignment documented on camera. And that's going to be something that Bricks and Minifigs, I don't think they're going to be able to overcome. Yeah, I think they can argue he didn't have the authority to assume the liability and the debt from Crystal's company, but they cannot argue that he did not receive notice, because he did receive notice, and he's an acting agent of the corporation. Therefore, successor liability will fall on Bricks and Minifigs. Regardless if Crystal was good with her books or not, regardless if she used some money in areas that she shouldn't have probably used money in, or she can't come up with the amount she's paid Brian, or she can't come up with the total that she owes Brian. And I don't blame her for not being able to come up with the total that she owes Brian, because during a legit takeover of a store, or when you buy a business, you should do due diligence. You should have a third-party auditor coming in to do the due diligence. You should know every contract that's written for that company, every contract that you're going to assume when you buy the business. And Crystal should be provided an inventory list. Without that, she has every legal right not to make Brian whole, right? Because she doesn't know how much she owes Brian. But my thing is, she can definitely, and I think she would have already done this, estimate it kind of roughly what she's already paid him. And I think that's very possible for her to do. Why she hasn't done that yet is kind of throwing me off. And it doesn't leave me with a good feeling. But back to Bricks and Minifigs, they assume liability for this consignment. If there's wrongdoing on Crystal's part, it is up to Bricks and Minifigs or BAM Franchising Incorporated to sue Crystal. But because they took over the business, brute force, and they were notified of the liability before they took over the business, before they officially reopened as a corporate store, owned by a corporate store, they were notified of this contract. They were notified of the consignment. Maybe not the contract, but it's their fault for not wanting more details when Crystal said, hey, I have a consignment. If I don't cash out, if I don't get the inventory, I'm not going to know how much I owe him. It is their responsibility to do the due diligence and say, hey, what do you mean you have a consignment? What do you mean you have a contract? Let's see this contract. Let's review the contract. Let's make sure we got the inventory correct. Because what we don't want to do is for you to walk away and we assume this contract, we assume the liability, we assume the debt, and you plainly disagree to pay Brian. Well, she can do that. And they had the responsibility, they had the due diligence to make sure they knew what they were buying. So they assumed the liability for this. And again, if Crystal did do some wrongdoing, and there may be wrongdoing on Crystal's part, and people may hate me for saying this, but some of that doesn't add up. I don't see how you cannot simply estimate how much you paid Brian so far. It makes no sense. I can get that you can estimate up to a certain point, but at least give us that. And the fact you can't distinguish the difference between your carbon copies or your payroll, between your employees, how much you pay your employees on a regular basis. You work 2 weeks for $18 an hour, well, whatever. You know how much that's going to be. You know how. The one thing a business owner knows and a small business owner knows is they know their payroll, because that is nerve-wracking. You know you have to have that money when it's time to pay your employees. You know that. So I don't buy into the fact she cannot distinguish the difference between payroll and what she's paid Brian. That's a problem. But again, regardless of that problem, this is going to fall on Bricks and Minifigs. And they owe Brian. They owe him for the Legos. They need to make him whole. Now, here's the thing. Because they didn't do proper due diligence, because they didn't hire a third-party auditor, nobody knows how much Brian's really owed. But it doesn't matter. All that is because BAM Franchising Inc. didn't do the proper due diligence on the store takeover. So whatever the number is, as long as it's reasonable and fair and can be justified legally by some type of documentation, they're going to have to pay him. And if they want to turn around and sue Crystal, they can do that. That's how business works, right? You can't be a huge corporation, brute force take over another company and say, no, we're gonna take everything good about this company and anything bad about this company you're left with, right? You take care of that. We're just going to take all the good. We're not going to assume any of the debt. That wasn't the agreement. That's not what they discussed when they took over the store. That's that. Again, this was a brute force takeover. It was brutal. And not only that, it happened at night. And then there's a U-Haul involved, and there's a rush to get all these Legos out of the store. This company, this is their practice. And honestly, this is karma coming back to them, because with this documentation, they will be held responsible for the Legos. And what they've been doing for years is simply going in, taking over stores, and just taking everything from these owners and really cheating the system and cheating the franchisees. But this time, karma's got them, because it's all documented, it's being made public, and they're going to have to foot the bill. And there's just no way they're going to get around that. All right, guys.
All of this stuff had corporate come in and actually done like a full accounting and a reconciliation and an inventory, like all of that would have been answered, right? Or
That's the
all
key
of that
thing.
would
I wanna
have
make
been,
sure people understand.
yeah.
Like, if we don't know, it's because corporate has decided to prevent us
Yeah.
from knowing.
Well, I would disagree with that. I mean, I think you can definitely estimate how much you've paid Brian. And I would think with this much coverage over the scandal, you would be making that top priority. But again, Bricks Minifigs, they're shitty company. They deserve everything they're getting. And I think Crystal had all the greatest intentions. It's tough being a small business owner. There's a lot to learn. I don't think she was good with her books, and maybe the money was used elsewhere. I think she had the best of intentions, but this is an honest conversation that needs to take place. I don't see a lot of people out here talking about it like that, but you know, I think there's some questionable stuff on her end. But again, BAM Franchising Inc. is the worst corporation ever. They deserve everything coming to them, everything. And I'm fully going to deep dive farther into this whole scandal and just expose as much as I possibly can. All right, guys, I'm out.